Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems, and with me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
That's not fair is a common reaction when we don't get our way. You react thinking the incident is over and closed, and the time and experience has no future value. But are there ways to make the outcome better than just fair? I say yes. Learn the valuable lessons learned through undesirable outcomes. As Bill and I discussed, That's Not Fair on episode 523 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
Well, our book club is on part 2, chapters 3 and 4 of How Clients Buy. Scott, I can't tell you, I'm in like 3 sales books right now. I'm prepping for our speaker next week. I'm still reading Negotiating with Backbone. And then I've got a John Maxwell book that I'm reading as well. So for those of you who just say you don't have time to read, get some books and start reading and quit farting around with your life and watching videos. So
Right, exactly. Good advice, Bill.
But do listen to podcasts. So anyway, the book club this week is brought to you by A.J. Imholt, a financial advisor dedicated to salespeople.
As a salesperson, you have enough to deal with. Prospects hang up on you, clients skip meetings, slow responses to your emails. It's enough to drive you bonkers. Fortunately, you can take control of your financial future. Your time is at a premium, and you want to focus on finding new clients and growing the customers you already have. So it's best to work with someone who takes the time to build an understanding of what you have on your plate. I'm AJ Imholt of Fortune Financial, and this is where I come in. As a financial advisor dedicated to salespeople, my goal is to help manage your portfolio so you can focus on what matters. Then, I'll take care of the boring details while you go out and crush your numbers. You can schedule a time to chat with me using the bookings link in the show notes. Good luck out there, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
A.J. Imholt is a registered representative and investment advisor representative of Security and Financial Services, Inc. Securities and investment advisory services offered through Security and Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. North Star Resource Group is independently owned and operated. Fortune Financial is affiliated with North Star Resource Group and is independently owned and operated.
All right, part 2 of How Clients Buy. This book is about selling consulting services, so keep that in mind. And what he talks about, chapter 3 is called Beyond Pixels. Selling a service is different from selling things and harder too. And that's where he's going to make the case for what we need to do different and what is different about selling services versus hard goods. He calls them credence goods. And the seller not only establishes the value, but establishes the need. So he gave an example of taking your computer into a computer store and they say, wow, this is kind of a mess. I'm going to have to spend a couple hours with this and here's what it's going to cost. So, they help you understand the problem and then define what the need is going to be. So he talks about one of the key values is going to be trust and how that trust is built. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I was first introduced to this concept of selling a service is selling a promise from the book Selling the Invisible by Harry Beckwith. And this was written in the 90s.
Great book.
The foundation, and it's still very relevant to today's marketplace. And the premise of that book is when you're selling a promise, the prospect determines the confidence and credibility in the bearer of the promise, which is the salesperson, and prospects define value by applying the solution, and the solution is your advice and confidence in you, the salesperson, and the promises that you give. The greater the value, the more you're able to charge, but it's also built, like you said, Bill, on the foundation of trust and respect and belief in the solution that the salesperson is proposing. And we need to be influential without coming across as being desperate. And I'll say it again, and I've said it many, many times, we need to educate to influence, not educate to teach. And that's a difficult lesson to learn. And I know that because in my years of sales, I started with, I need to educate the prospect. I need to teach the prospect about our solutions. I need to tell them about everything that we offer and leave it up to them to determine the application, which is a mistake. We need to work with prospects to apply the promise, apply the solution, and sell the outcome. And I think this is what that book is really getting at.
Well, when he talks about selling this solution, there's 3 R's that he talks about as ways to get this business. And that is relationships, who you already know, referrals, which is how I got the last piece of business that I got, and reputation. And that's what your reputation is out in the marketplace. So the 3 R's: relationships, referrals, and reputation. I find relationships are what keeps you getting business over and over again, as well as referrals. Reputation, I think, is hard to build unless you're going to be one of the big hitters. Now, you and I are working in a smaller venue. We're not one of the big 6, accounting firms or whatever. But I think our reputation within our city is very important, which is why we put time into nonprofits, getting ourselves out in front of people, doing presentations, doing newsletters, doing articles that we put on LinkedIn. Now, those are all ways to build your reputation.
And being involved in the community. And I think one of the things that you and I both do, Bill, is supporting the PSA, Professional Sales Association. And what that is, and listeners from across the world can do this in their local communities, is you're demonstrating a public commitment to the profession that you've committed your life to as a career and as a calling. So demonstrate your commitment publicly. It makes it an investment of your reputation, and it makes you accountable to your community. And once you're accountable to your community, confidence is determined by the prospect seeing that public commitment and building your reputation. So it's a very good point.
All right. So let's talk about what's different about selling something that doesn't have features and attributes. And I think that's really the key. Is he's saying, well, when you go out to buy a cell phone, you're looking for something that has X amount of memory and the size of the screen and all the value proposition are things that you kind of intrinsically know you want. When you're selling a service, it's hard to make that comparison from vendor to vendor. And so that's why we rely on relationships, referrals, and reputation, because that's really all we have to go on. I know the question that I get, and I'm sure you do, Scott, is what is your promise? What is your promise to perform? And if we're not performing fast enough early on, we might get that email that says, what are you doing? And I know for me, what I do for the first month often is learn. And it doesn't look like much is happening, but I'm learning your business so I can make recommendations. But I think people want recommendations quicker than they're ready to come out.
Yeah. 2 things I'll add on that is you are learning, but you're also learning about how they got to where they are and some of the things that they tried in the past, which may or may not have worked. And also maybe the things that they overlooked based on the development of the service that may be more applicable now. So when you find out how they got to where they are, it's important to add context to the solution and advice that you're going to be delivering to them later.
Right. You're trying to prove that you know something now. Beyond the general, you're starting to learn the specifics.
Right. And another thing that I think that it's really important is to create a timeline of how you're going to be implementing your services and how to keep you on track, but also how to keep your prospect on track.
Right.
How many of us are waiting for information from our prospects? And it gets into days, which then gets into weeks, which then delays projects months.
Right.
And then the prospect is always blaming us. We need to get ahead of it for our own sake, is to get a timeline put together, agree to the timeline, follow the timeline. I learned this when I was selling websites to attorneys on the East Coast. I'd sell the website and then they tell me, well, I want it released in a month. I say, okay, great. Here's the timeline of when we need all of the content from you. And they always took 3 times as long on getting me the content as to when they wanted it released.
Right. And then you have the challenge that they don't want to hear what you have to say. I told the client that I'm working with, chances are good I'm going to piss you off a couple of times during this process. And I said, my goal isn't to piss you off, but my goal is to tell you the truth. And sometimes that's going to, you probably know that truth, but you just haven't wanted to stare it in the face. So,
and they want to hear it. I mean, like I've said before, from the challenger sale, if we don't challenge them, we don't change them.
Right.
And we got to challenge them. And sometimes they may feel that they're disappointed or they're upset with the truth.
All right, back to the book. He makes comparisons in a chart on page 35. If you've bought the book, you know this. And what he compares is product sales to credence sales. I'm just going to go over these really quick. Product sales are tangible, credence intangible. Product sales have specifications, credence has reputation. Product has attributes, credence has credibility, believability. Products have features, credence has respect. Product has a warranty, credence has thought leadership. Product has promotions, credence has relationships. Products has brick and mortar and internet, and credence goods have trust, but I think we also have internet and sometimes brick and mortar. I do think that brick and mortar can be valuable when selling a credence good because it says you're going to be around for a while. I remember one of the situations I had very early in my process. I lived in Bloomington, so as a member, I joined the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce very early, and no one would really buy from me until I'd been around about a year. And then they started to do some business with me. And I asked one guy why. He said, well, we wanted to see if you were going to stick around.
Yeah.
And we laughed about this in our last podcast. The people who say, yeah, I'm a fractional CFO until I find a real job.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah,
that's
that
right.
happens.
Yep. So anyway, any thoughts on that chart?
No, it's a great list, and one thing I think that product sales does not include is a guarantee. And in most cases, when you're offering a service, it's tough to offer a guarantee or a warranty. But the value of the credibility the prospect has is to determine the value that the check is made out to the salesperson.
Right.
And sometimes when salespeople are selling a product, they don't put as much emphasis on the reputation and the service, because if it doesn't work, they can always replace it. Well, we'll just swap it out.
We'll give you a new one. Yep.
I mean, I knew of a guy who laid concrete, and I said, what kind of guarantee or what kind of warranty do you offer? And he goes, if they don't like it, I rip it up and redo it. It's like, okay, well, I guess that's one way of doing it. I mean, we don't have that option when you're selling a service. You're selling time. You're working against time, working with time to your advantage. So you need to be able to, establish that credibility and that reputation. It's very important.
Absolutely. All right. So one last point that I want to make from this chapter. He talks about the law of supply and demand being corrupted, which I found interesting. There's a lot of consultants out there. For you and I, there's a lot of people who consult on sales or leadership. And so why can some companies, even though there's a lot of competition, still be able to charge a lot? And that is that reputation that's out there. Right. And you can charge more because your reputation is high. The demand is high for you individually or for your organization, and therefore you can demand more. I've always told people who have started to be in consulting, they say, well, how much should I charge? And it's like, well, depends on how much reputation you have. Pretty early on, when you're not busy, you charge whatever it takes to get busy. As you start to get very busy, then you can make the decision to charge more because your time is now more valuable. But when you got nothing to do, you might go for a lower hourly fee. So it kind of depends on what you need.
Right. No, that's absolutely spot on. And it's pricing based on the outcome and not always necessarily the time or the cost of goods sold, which is more of a product selling. It is more of the cost of goods sold.
All right. So he finishes up the chapter talking about, is it 4 hurdles we have to overcome?
Four systematic obstacles.
Yeah. So we're going to go, that'll be the next 4 chapters, coincidentally. Yeah. And chapter 4 is obstacle 1. What they don't teach you in business school. If I am supposed to be the expert, why do I feel so stupid about sales?
That's right.
And this gives me a great opportunity, as you know, I love to do, to beat the hell out of university system, which is usually made of a bunch of arrogant people who have never done what they're trying to teach. No, I'm not saving it for group.
I'm for group. Okay.
No more of that, Scott. I'm going to tell people what I think. My son spent, $600,000, $750,000 on college, all of them to come out and tell me, well, what I learned in college, I'm really not going to use in my classes or in my business. I'll have to relearn what I need to know. So maybe you business school teachers ought to spend some time actually doing what you're teaching and see if you can teach these young kids something they're going to actually use. So what he's talking about in this is that the business schools don't teach sales. Now they're starting to do that a little bit more.
Yeah.
There are some sales organizations. As a matter of fact, at PSA, we had a speaker from University of Minnesota, Duluth. His name isn't coming to me, but he's the head of the sales course, the professional selling program at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. And so I think that's great. If he's actually been out selling some things, that's even better. So, what do you think about this? Should they teach more about this in business school, or what should we do?
I totally agree. And there's really a difference between practice and theory. And unfortunately, I think some of the educators in the brick building entered when they were 5 years old and never left. And a lot has changed in the marketplace. And I remember going through school and having textbooks be, 10 or 15 years old. And, the product knowledge doubles every 5 years. There's so many things that come out. And unfortunately, our education system is going through a whole reform right now, which is, not always good. And we're starting to erase history or starting to rewrite history. And that's a whole nother topic. But we need to be able to look at a skill that is going to be useful in no matter what we have as a career. And I think sales, influence, persuasion skills are going to be very, very powerful, but they're not taught in schools. You have to go outside of the brick building to get that education, and it's applicable throughout your entire life. And we're going to talk a little bit about that on the next segment when, that's not fair. And we're going to get in a little bit deeper about that. But I totally agree with you, Bill.
Scott, I went to 4 years, well, probably 4.5 years of college at a university, major university in communications. And then I came out of those classes learning very little about communication. And I was asked by my company to take the Dale Carnegie course, which is a 14-week course. It was at the time. It's 12 weeks now, I think. Anyway, here's what I thought throughout that whole course. Why didn't they teach me any of this stuff in my 4 years of school in communications? I learned more about communications in 14 weeks of taking the Dale Carnegie course than I did in my entire 4.5 years at that major university. Now, fortunately, in my day, it was a lot cheaper now, but now you could spend $200,000 to get the same lousy education and come out. And you and I, we've been teaching people for years, young people that come out of school, they know nothing about real world situations. Everything they know is theoretical and in my opinion, fairly useless toward what's going to happen. They can do a rubber chicken chart, but they can't talk to people. Right. They can't have a conversation. They can't be a persuader. And that's what we are teaching people to do. So I think it's crazy that people come out without, and they don't even know how to run a calendar. They don't know how to budget. They don't know how to run a checkbook. This is what we're coming out of our schools with, but they can do, an advanced rubber chicken chart and whatever they want to do. So selling is a real key value. I think it's valuable for everybody to learn how to sell. And that's why you feel stupid, because you don't know how to sell. I've talked to a lot of people, Scott. I'm an expert at accounting, and then their business fails. And why does it almost always fail? Expect people come pawn at their door to do business instead of learning how to sell it.
Right. And that's the legal profession. Unfortunately, attorneys are kind of restricted when they can't really market and they can't actively solicit in a way to get business. They always have to have clients and prospects call them to start the conversation. So they're a little bit held back in that area. I've learned that when college graduates graduate, they get into sales, they still think that they're being tested. They're being tested by the prospect. And when the prospect asks a question, the salespeople are tempted to answer it. And they fall through on that temptation. They follow through and they answer the questions, but they don't ask a question. So just because you graduated from college and now you're a salesperson, you're not being tested anymore. It's important for you to understand the intent behind the content. Why is that prospect asking you that question? And qualify that. That's part of a sales job. And I'll include a blog that I wrote, You're Not Being Tested, which is a chapter out of my book, Taking Off into the Wind, for our listeners that want to check that out.
All right. Great thoughts. Okay. I just want to close with this idea. If you want to get to the highest level of a consulting firm, you need to be a rainmaker.
Yeah, true.
That means you need to be sales. And that's the one thing they didn't teach you. And they're not going to probably teach you that at the consulting firm either. You better get off your rusty dusty and start figuring out how you're going to sell and get over what the schools teach you is selling is somehow beneath you. Mm-hmm. Being an influencer is what selling is all about. And if you're not willing to be an influencer, you won't be a rainmaker. You'll always just be a worker bee at that consulting firm.
Great advice. One of the things that I took out of this latest chapter 4, is, simple advice. Do good work. Be honest in all your relationships. Be civically active. Write for a publication when you can, and never turn down a chance to speak in public. And those are all great ways to build credibility, to demonstrate your knowledge, and to work on attracting people to you. But once you attract them to you, then you need to start asking questions to qualify what's most important to them. Why are they bringing this to your attention now? What have they done in the past? And we'll talk more about questions in future topics.
All right. Excellent way to close that out. Now, you alluded to your topic today. That's not fair. So what do you got to start with that?
Yeah. The message is that's not fair. And we're going to dig into that after a message from BusyWeb, a growth, marketing, and sales enablement agency.
This is Dave Meyer with BusyWeb, a proud supporter of the Winning at Selling podcast. BusyWeb is a growth, marketing, and sales enablement agency in Minneapolis. Each week, I'm bringing you buzz tips customized for sales pros to help you land more deals. If you need help driving leads to your biz, check us out at busyweb.com. That's BIZZYWEB.com. This week's tip, track your sales activity in a CRM. Sales is one of those things that requires persistence and patience. And the more you know about your prospects, the easier it is to stay connected. Having a contact resource management system is an essential part of staying in touch. Having a spreadsheet with contact info isn't enough, and neither is having Post-its all over your desk. Modern systems track most information for you. Tools like my personal favorite, HubSpot, track every email you send, every call you make, and all the deals in your pipeline. If you don't have a CRM, let's get you into the 21st century. Click the sponsor icon at winningatselling.com for more online sales tips, or go to busyweb.com, that's BIZZYWEB.com, for tools to start engaging your prospective buyers. Or give us a call at 612-4BUSY-O, that's 612-424-9990. Generate buzz without getting stung.
So our topic, that's not fair, is a common reaction that salespeople have when they don't get their way, when something doesn't come out the way they want it to, and they hang their head, they look at their shoes, and they go, that's not fair. And let me ask you a question, salespeople that feel that that's not fair. Where do you learn the greatest lessons? And I would submit that you learn them from not getting the outcomes that you want. And it's so important for sales coaches, sales managers, directors of sales to debrief sales calls with sales people, to be actively involved listening to conversations. After the conversation is over with, debrief with the salesperson. And here's how the debrief goes. What went really well? What did you get a good response to? What didn't go well? If you had a chance to do it over, what would you do different? And when you look at the outcome of that situation, you can gain value from it and you can do the next call better. So is there a better outcome than that's not fair? Yes, a greater outcome, a learning experience where you end up applying lessons learned that didn't work. Bill, have you ever been through that?
Yeah, Scott, I think this is really important. I don't think I ever had a sales manager that did what you're talking about, which is to debrief it. And I think when you don't have someone pushing you to do that, you tend to kick the stones at your feet and say, those lousy bastards, they didn't, they should have bought from me and they just bought the wrong thing. And you learn a bad lesson from it, which is it's their fault, not yours. And if it's the client's fault, then you can't change anything. So you get a bad impression. I do think I'm going to beat up on the school system one more time,
Okay.
Very gently here, so you don't advise me to go take it to
save it for group.
Yeah, and that is that if all of our life for 12 years we're graded on what we don't know, and I think failure becomes a challenge for us. If we don't know how to fail and fail forward, as John Maxwell talks about, we're going to be in real trouble. But we spend all of our life in school trying to be perfect. Mm-hmm. You get 5 wrong out of 100 on a paper. What does it say? -5 in red and circled, with the idea that if you had done those 5, you'd have been perfect. And that's what we're looking for in school. Business is very different. It's sloppy, it's messy, and it's imperfect. And the biggest mistake you can make is what you talked about. And that is not learning from those mistakes so you don't repeat them. But if you blame the client, you're going to repeat the mistakes because you're going to continue to make the same errors.
Yeah, I call that I learned this from Dennis Prager, one of big admirer of Dennis Prager. He calls it the missing tile syndrome. And you get into a beautiful new office and you walk in and everything looks great, except there's that one missing tile. Whoever worked on the HVAC system didn't slide that tile back when they were done. And all you focus on is that missing tile in the ceiling, and everything else is great. Wait a minute here. That's an easy fix. And then we can make it perfect if we want perfect. But I think we should strive for excellence and be satisfied with the outcome that we have and improve on the next opportunity we have when it comes to that.
Well, and that's why we read books. That's why we listen to other podcasts. That's why we watch videos, is because we're trying to get better all the time. You can't get better just within your own mind. right? You don't always recognize the mistakes unless you debrief with somebody and have them pull those mistakes out of you. So I know you and I had a deal we were working on. We lost the deal, and you and I sat down, spent some time talking about what we could have done better to make it better for that particular client. So I think you like to blame them, but also you have to look at yourself and the actions you took to get better. And I think that's what you mean by learning a lesson from that's not fair.
And that's working with prospects. We debrief sales calls. There's a lot of competition within sales teams, and there's usually a top salesperson of the month. And if you look at who the top salesperson is, and you go, "Well, that's not fair,"
no, he got lucky.
Work as hard
he
as
got
I
lucky.
Did,
Yeah.
They're related to the owner, and
right.
Family business, and you got to ask yourself when it comes to that. How much time and talent and treasure did you invest in striving for this top rep of the office? And if you didn't make it, what do you need to do different? What was the outcome and the lesson learned? And it's based on your experience and relevant in today's marketplace. More is needed to achieve the top spot. Good to know. I mean, what a great lesson to learn is, okay, I'm graded on a curve, and some other person outperformed me this month. That doesn't mean that I'm going to surrender and not compete next month, but I need to do something different and invest more time.
But I gave you a participation medal.
Oh, cute. Yeah. Nice little yellow ribbon that I can hang up, and my participation medal.
You tried on the sale and they didn't like you, so it's their fault that here's your participation medal. So we don't get paid for participation in sales. We get paid for closing the deal and moving it forward. So
yeah. Sometimes we get caught up on our rights. I have a right. But do you have the skill and the ability? I went and saw Top Gun Maverick, and, I have the right to join the Navy and play Lieutenant Pete Mitchell and test supersonic jets at Mach 10 over the desert, but I don't have the body and the talent to do that. And I couldn't get off the ground. It's not my strength, nor do I want to pursue it, but I have the right. And that's not fair. Wait a minute here. Yeah, you have the right, but do you have the talent and the ability to be able to deliver on that? So don't get just caught up on rights. Invest in the talent and the ability on a fair playing field at standards that are the highest possible standards available. Another one that I've thought of is you have good judgment. Salespeople are trained through their experiences to exercise good judgment. We start on a journey with a great ambition with limited knowledge, and salespeople are taught that attitude is everything. Come on. It's not everything. It's important, but it's not everything. Skills, knowledge, and commitment are necessary contributors to the outcome of a success. In the beginning of a pursuit, did we seek, observe, exercise good options? And I've learned this with companies that set a budget. Well, we set our budget in November, and that's what we're going to go for. Well, if there's a new option that's available in March, are you going to change the direction of how you manage and lead the company? Or are you just going to continue heading off a cliff and continuing to pay for long distance? I mean, at one point, somebody decided, look, long distance is included. We're going to start a new plan that includes long distance, and we're going to stop paying for long distance.
I think you should save this for group, Scott.
I know. I'm passionate about this. And it's like, you got to be able to exercise good judgment and better options along the way.
All right. So question, how do you develop good judgment?
You look at other options, and you have to take personal accountability for your actions and your decisions and look at, is there a way where I could have gotten a better outcome? Companies hire people, unfortunately, on past experiences and overlook the importance of good judgment. I believe companies should hire people on good judgment and teach them the skills and the talent necessary to perform the role. But good judgment is a commitment to yourself of betterment. How many people have you worked with, Bill, that don't want to read a book outside of company time? I find this to be a common objection. It's like, well, if I can read it on company time, I'll do it. I was up at 6:00 this morning. I read for an hour, and I tell you, it lit me up today because I learned something new. One of my strengths is learner. When I'm reading something and I'm taking in more information on stuff that I don't know that's relevant to my career, and I can share it with our listeners, that gets me excited. I want to bring value to our listeners every single podcast, and I want them them to share it with other people that they hang around with, because our listeners are winners and they hang around other winners. And it's our obligation to deliver that content. And we're grateful that our listenership keeps increasing. It's because of our listeners keep sharing the episode. And when I learn something and I share it, I feel fulfilled. It's like a gift that I'm sharing with the listeners, and they appreciate it because our listenership keeps going up.
Well, that's great. I think one of the ways to develop good judgment is through bad judgment.
Right.
And if you're never trying things, if you're never going outside of the way you'd always do things, you can't develop better judgment, because you're continuing either to make the same mistakes that you've made before, or you're never challenging yourself to try something new. So, for example, in sales, I might get myself locked into a certain size customer, and I feel comfortable with that size of a sale, and a sale bigger than that sometimes makes me feel uncomfortable, and therefore I don't necessarily go after those bigger sales. That's bad judgment, because I'm learning the wrong lesson. There's an old saying by Mark Twain: a cat who sits on a hot stove lid will never sit on a hot stove lid again. Unfortunately, he'll never sit on a cold one either. Right. And so the lesson we can learn wrong is, I made a mistake, that didn't work out, so I'm never going to do that again. Yeah. Where the situation should be, that didn't work out, I made a mistake, how can I do it better so the next time I can succeed? So be careful in how you're making your judgments and what you're learning from mistakes. You can learn the wrong thing. And that's why somebody helping you walk through it, who has more experience, who has a bigger vision, can be very helpful.
Yeah. And talking about poor judgment is a lack of self-awareness. Conversations are always held within context. There are some people that are celebrating, others are grieving, some are listening, others are not. And a salesperson is one that has an impact on the experience and an influence on the outcome. Did you influence the outcome you wanted? If not, you learned what didn't work. That's a great lesson. Try something else the next time. Think about Thomas Edison or Alexander Bell or Colonel Sanders. I mean, we've all heard about these stories about people who had great ideas, great products, great inventions, but got tremendous failure along the way, but they always learned something new to become a great success. So exercise self-awareness. And I tell you, when I look at people that lack self-awareness, they're clueless as to how they come off with other people. And they're clueless about the impact that they have on others in everything that they think and they do, and what they don't do and what they don't think. And
right.
It's self-awareness. I think that's so important, is to have self-awareness.
Well, that comes from that blaming attitude, right? That says it's always someone's fault but mine. We can't change other people. We need to make changes in ourselves. So examine the situation, see where you could have been at fault, be open to the idea that you could have been at fault. That's self-awareness, right? What did I do? What could I have done differently? Yeah, sometimes the client just makes a bad decision, but you still have to look at it for incremental increases that you might have. So, Scott, do you have some resources that can help people to understand this topic a little bit better?
I'll include a blog, You're Not Being Tested. So that's going to help on playing the role of a salesperson, getting more information. Your goal as a salesperson is to get information, and then to be able to use that information to the strength of the product and service that you offer, to the value that the prospect is seeking. So I'll include a link to that blog.
All right, excellent. Let's wrap up with our golden nugget. This is from Sue Monk Kidd in her book, The Secret Life of Bees. Nothing is fair in this world. You might as well get that straight right now.
That's so true. My point exactly. Take the lessons learned and change the behavior for a better outcome. If you had a chance to do it over, what would you do different? And constantly ask yourself that question. If you're not conscious of that, you're not exercising good judgment. And if you lack good judgment, it's because you don't have self-awareness.
All right.
Everything that we talked about is going to be at our website, winningatselling.com. Again, this is episode 523.
Next week, we have no book club because we have a guest. David Hoffeld is going to talk about his new book, Sell More with Science. So I'm really looking forward to that. As we've been mentioning the past few podcasts, Scott and I have a goal to increase our downloads to 12,000 per month by the end of September. So please subscribe, share this podcast with colleagues, put it on your social media. We'd be very grateful for that. And reach out to us on LinkedIn, and let's connect on that. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.